Psalm for today is Psalm 37. Fret not because of evildoers, neither do be envious against the ungodly, for they will soon fall down like the grass and wither like the green herbs. Put your trust in the Lord and be doing good. Dwell in the land, you will be fed. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desire of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, put your trust in him, and he will do it. This. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when evil men prosper. Refrain from anger, turn from wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil, for evil men will be cut out. But those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. This is the word of the Lord. So welcome back from spring break. I hope you've had a good break. Those of you in the back might want to turn on the light so that it doesn't feel like nap time. I mean, it's always dangerous after chapel because you listen to the dean talk and you listen to me talk and then you're done by time. Thanks very much. What I want to do today is kind of set up the three major kind of texts that lead to the Enlightenment. We've already mentioned one of them, and I want to kind of do a quick recreation of the Locke mini lecture at the beginning of class on Friday, because about half of you weren't here. I'm not going to do a full recreation of it, so if you don't have it in your notes, you need to go back and put that in your notes because you'll want it on the final exams. John Locke, basics, what you need to know about him. He's the son of a minor Puritan landowner, so he's really middle class. He comes from a family background that's like many of yours. He is not of the generation that fought in the Civil War. He's too young. He was a teenage boy during the Civil War. And so he grew up in the generation after that. Locke's professors described him after he became famous with this curious word. They described him as taciturn. You know what that word means? What does it mean to say that someone is taciturn? If you asked your professor for a recommendation because he wanted to go to med school and they wrote taciturn, Jenna, taciturn, what would that mean? This word is usually used as kind of a key to understanding Locke. It's an old-fashioned way of saying that they were really introverted, really quiet. Jenna is not, in my mind, taciturn. She's in my seminar on the American Revolution. I know what Jenna thinks. I know how you feel about Mercy Otis Warren. You tell me things, right? I like that. Locke was not that kind of student. He was quiet. He kept his mouth shut. He didn't want people to know what he thought because he grew up in this age of religious war and revolution where they'd killed the king. So Locke is very careful and very guarded in this text. And when you read Locke, you kind of have to read between the lines. Pay attention to what he says. Pay attention to what he doesn't say. Will help you understand it. We've already sort of introduced his letter on toleration. If you want detailed notes on that, look at your notes from Friday or go back and watch the lecture. But the essence of his approach to toleration is that he's the first person, I think, to give a justification for religious toleration on purely secular grounds. Cromwell and Milton had argued that we ought to have religious freedom in England, but they did it because they were like religious extremists. They were radical Puritans and recognized that they were in the minority. So they wanted religious freedom so they could have the freedom to be Puritans. Locke's argument is different. He makes a secular argument that it's really not the government's business to intervene in affairs of religion, because, and this is the crucial distinction for Locke, this is going to apply in the politics today too, is that there's essentially a distinction between the private life of an individual and the public realm of the state. And religious freedom should be in the private realm of the individual, because no one can tell anyone in that space what to think. No one can tell anyone what to believe. You can be banned from doing dangerous things or saying dangerous things in the public world, But in private with your family, you can sort of, you should be able to practice your religion and know what's going on. Okay. The overall kind of trajectory for this week then is today we're going to talk about, I think, the most important of his three works, the two treatises on government. If you have ever studied or looked at the American Revolution or the Declaration of Independence in particular, like if there are core Lockean ideas expressed to the extent that the US is a development of one of the major thinkers that we've read this semester, like it's probably Locke in this Puritan tradition. Then on Wednesday, we're going to do Isaac Newton and the Scientific Revolution. This might be the most evil reading of the semester because it's 4 pages. And it seems, I mean, 4 pages is really nice, right? Sometimes I assign like 120 pages, but it's 4 pages of Isaac Newton. So good luck, read through it, see if you can understand, but especially look to Newton for these questions about science and religion. These are the great questions of the 17th century. So what does Newton think science is? Where does he think it comes from? What does Newton think religion is? What kind of religious principles does he want to defend? Does he talk about religious toleration? Newton is one of these people that everyone has an opinion on, and nobody really knows what he says. Like everyone wants Newton on your side because Newton is the greatest scientist of the modern age. Newton is right. If Newton's on your side, then you must be right. But nobody really knows what he says about anything. And then on Friday, we'll come back to another piece by Locke, the essay on human understanding, which is really the foundation of modern psychology. Voltaire will write in the generation after these two men that these are the two men that started the Enlightenment. I'm really skeptical of this term. We won't actually be doing the Enlightenment for quite a while. People who were living in the Enlightenment didn't really want to take the credit for starting it. They wanted it to have been started by geniuses. And so they pointed back to these two men as the geniuses that triggered the Enlightenment. I'm not so sure. So especially when we talk about religion, we should ask ourselves at the end of class, is this really what enlightenment is? Is this really a modern secular approach to life and society? This is some of the big questions that we're going to deal with this week. So questions? Comments? How's your break? I had a wonderful break, which means I didn't grade as much as I should have. But midterm grades are due on Tuesday night. So I'm going to be getting, like, you should get your exams back on Wednesday because I have to get your exams back on Wednesday. That's sort of the way it is. Okay. Well, let's talk about Locke in a second. The two treatises on government. So the title I've given you here is a bit of a mislabeling. Because it says it starts as the second treatise, but if there's a second treatise, there's a first treatise. And it's really pretty strange to read the second treatise without the first treatise, because he's halfway through his argument and it's been building. The first treatise is a book about families. So Locke's theory of politics, we should say at the outset, doesn't begin with a long treatment of the sovereign autonomous self. It begins with the treatment of families. And Locke had written this book in response to a very popular defense of family power with a really apt title. The book was called Patriarchy, which is a Latin way of saying patriarchy. And if you're going to write a book in defense of patriarchy, it pretty much says what you think it would. It's the sort of book that would make people really furious today. It was written by Sir Robert Filmer, and Filmer argued that no person was born free and autonomous. Everyone that was born in society was born with parents, and they were born subject to their parents. So this is his way of sort of answering Hobbes. Hobbes says all people are born sort of free and equal, and we're born in the savage state of nature. And in the aftermath of the English Civil War, people wanted to disprove Hobbes. So Filmer wrote this book arguing for patriarchy. So the first half of the treatises, Locke refutes this claim by pointing out that earthly fathers do not have absolute political authority, that there are limits on political power in families, and that limits on power are in fact natural. What limits the power of fathers, do you think? Can your dad do whatever he wants to? There better not be long silence on this one. No, right? Who limits the power of fathers? Yeah. Okay, so the government certainly does. Filmer wanted to say that families were older than government. So, you know, yes, the government does, but for Filmer, that's not good enough. So what are the kind of limits? Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. So Locke argues from the premise that there's a God who instituted he doesn't say moral law, because that's the language of morality and values is Enlightenment language. Locke would say natural law. There's a structure to the universe that God has created that limits what fathers can do. Pay careful attention to the way that he set this design up, right? So there's a distinction in the letter on toleration and now in the first treatise between family life and political life. And political life is governed by the law of society. What governs family life? Well, it might be natural authority of fathers, or it might be some kind of natural law that comes from God. This distinction that Locke makes is kind of largely undefended here, but it's a major kind of feature in modern liberal theory, that there's a distinction between the personal and the political. And this distinction is going to last in modern liberalism until you get to the mid-20th century. And you probably won't take 201 with me, but if you take 201 with someone, if you get to the mid-20th century and they're not talking about feminism, you should bring it up. Make life a little hard for the professor and say, wait, excuse me, when are we going to talk about feminism? Because the feminist political philosophers of the mid-20th century made this point really aggressively. They would say the personal is political, and that there is that distinction that Locke makes between these two realms is maybe questionable. But in his age, everyone sort of accepted it, like family and society, these are the two. That's most of what you need to know moving into the second treatise. Now, I've tried to reduce this to a fixed number of pages. It's designed to be read in one sitting. The challenge is you've just gotten off spring break. And I've been teaching long enough that I don't honestly expect you to have read this as carefully as you will read it when you're getting ready for the next exam, right? So I'm going to walk you through what's important here with the understanding that, like, talk as you are able, but this is like when we cover the next bit of Locke on Friday, I want to have a much fuller discussion than we might have to. And please shock me and surprise me, blow me away by how much you know about the text, but I'm not expecting that you will have read as much as you should have. But let's get started. Locke begins the way that Hobbes begins, with the discussion of something called the state of nature. What does it mean with this phrase? Well, this is common to Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau. What does the state of nature mean when a philosopher talks about this? Hopefully this is just review. Could we go anywhere today and find a person in the state of nature? What do you think? Mountain Dew is the key to good conversation because I can just drink it while you think. Yeah.
Okay. You can probably, I think it's talking about like being naturally like in nature, like everything is just natural with a person's life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's possible to do that, but it's not possible to be completely from like in nature because everything in nature is now affected by all of these technologies and things.
Right. Yeah. So he part of his story, we want to figure out like what makes this tick as a theory. And one of the things that's really interesting is like I'm sort of in a map time here, and this is the beginning of society, and this is a really advanced society. And one of the things that Locke assumes, you've nicely pointed this out, is that Locke assumes technological progress. Now, he's not giving us a massive theory of it, like that comes later in the Enlightenment, but now we're beginning to assume that people 40 years from now will have more technology than we do, and that's going to lead to a social development. So like Locke is the philosophy of liberalism, and kind of hard-coded into liberalism is this assumption that we're going to have technological progress. Yeah. So, yeah, generally speaking, you're going to find the state of nature then in the past rather than the present. But are there places, and it's pretty hard in the 21st century, but Locke is writing this in the 17th century. Are there places in the 17th century where Locke thought you could find the state of nature? Where would you go to find a place without a lot of technology and without much government? Yeah? You could go to the middle of the jungle, sure, sure. What would he imagine this jungle, where would he imagine this jungle to be? This is hard, but yeah.
Africa or the Americas?
Yeah, he's probably imagining the Amazon. Like the Africa at this point in time is there's a really robust slave trade that's developing on the African coast that we'll talk about in 2 or 3 weeks. But you can't go into the interior of Africa as a European without contracting some kind of malarial disease. So Africa is almost completely unknown, about 2 miles into the interior. So he's probably imagining the Americas. So in that sense, you could say that Locke is in a double sense a political philosopher of Americans, because like the American regime is built on Lockean principles, but he also thinks he's describing this place. We should ask ourselves if he gets it right as we move further into the analysis. So what is the state of nature like? Locke says in the first section I gave to you, the state of nature is a state of equality, wherein all the power and jurisdiction is, the word he uses is reciprocal. No one has more than any other. There being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank is promiscuously born to all of the advantages of nature, and the use of the same faculties should be equal amongst one another. And he means equality in the exact sense we described with Hobbes. It's not like one person isn't smarter than another, and it's not like LeBron can't shoot basketball better than I can. He's much better at it. But the idea there is like no one person is so much better than the other person that you couldn't destroy them. Like we all have a rough kind of equality. It doesn't have to be precise. So this sounds like Hobbes. This is a state of nature theory. We are all basically born in a wild, equal state. Hierarchy then is unnatural. That doesn't mean it's illegitimate, but it's not natural. It must, and so because it's not natural, it needs another justification if we're going to have a hierarchy. So this is where Locke and Hobbes part ways pretty dramatically. And you get this in section 6, which is the next section in your reading. Okay. It says, though this is a state of liberty, people in the state of nature have a liberty to kind of do whatever they want, maybe not. Let's see what he says. He says, though this be a state of liberty, it is not a state of license. Though man in that state has an uncontrollable liberty to dispose of his person or possessions, he has not the liberty to destroy himself or so much as any creature in his possession, but where some nobler use than its bare preservation calls for it. Let's unpack that a little bit. He says it's a state of liberty, not a state of license. These distinctions meant a lot more in 17th century English than they do today. Because license for us means I've got a driver's license and I can kind of do what I want. But
I have a question about the hierarchy.
Yeah.
What would you say about like animals do have hierarchies?
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
Like, in their they always have like different rankings.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and modern day psychology, late 20th century psychology has done so much with us, right? And Jordan Peterson has sort of made a YouTube career for himself about like talking about this on YouTube videos and bringing people into contact with the psychological world. Yeah, Locke's arguing that's not so. Yeah. So in that sense, modern psychology has really called into question the psychological orientation of this sort of state of nature idea. But Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau are presuming, yeah, we're all basically equal. Whereas I think, yeah, the line of research that you're suggesting is that like, no, the human animal is actually a deeply hierarchical animal, and we all kind of crave rank. The Hobbes and
and I'm actually, to the extent that I'm one of these three, I'm Lockean, so I'm going to make an argument against my own position. But Hobbes and Rousseau are actually better at this than Locke is. Like, they all say we live in a state of nature, and they're all going to identify a primal psychological drive. And one of Hobbes' primal drives, you remember, is this quest for honor, right? So he does say that people are really competitive in the state of nature, and you're all basically equal, but I want to be better than Luke. I mean, I recognize he's taller than I am, he's a better shot than I am, but still, like, part of me wants to be better than him. And if I get the chance to off him in the middle of the night so that I can be the best basketball player in the room, I might do it, right? That's Hobbes' justification. Locke doesn't really think we're motivated by that. Like, he doesn't, there's a different kind of primal drive. And if we can figure out what that is, then that'll help us unpack. When we get to Rousseau, Rousseau thinks that it's similar, but Hobbes thinks we're naturally kind of honor competitive. Rousseau says basically Rousseau is describing sort of the Instagram generation. And Rousseau's like, yeah, we're all basically in love with ourselves and the way that we look, and we're always kind of taking selfies, and there's something psychologically true about that. Well, let's get into Locke. So everyone has liberty, but he doesn't want to take it too far. Can you do absolutely anything you want? No. So he's going to say, you have these basic psychological instincts. This isn't a state of license. You control your life, and you can't destroy it, but you have this drive to do something noble with your life, right? Something more than bare self-preservation. So he says here, this is where he moves into this thing called natural law really fast. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is natural law, obliges everyone. Reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. So there's a really crucial difference there on page 1 between him and Hobbes. Hobbes is like, you've got a life, and you'll do anything to defend your life, and that's it. This is like, no. People aren't scared animals. They're rational creatures, and they're calculating. They can make decisions about how to improve themselves. And so you are going to have a rough sort of understanding that like, Hailey is not going to mess with my life, and I'm not going to mess with her life. But it's more than that. I'm not going to take her shoes, and she's not going to take my shoes. Like, I'm not going to mess with her freedom, and she's not going to mess with my freedom, because generally speaking, we want to be left alone. And there's this sort of, rather than sort of Hobbes's natural law is like this, life is nasty, short and brutish, and we're all trying to kill each other. Hobbes is like, actually, no, we're all kind of, we're naturally taciturn. We're naturally kind of introverts. We all kind of want to leave each other alone. Like, you stay in your room, I'll stay in my room, I'll do my thing, you'll do your thing. And like, we don't need to bother each other. And this view of natural law sort of has with it a sense of duties. Your right to your life imposes on me a duty to protect your life, or maybe not that, but a duty to leave your life alone, if that makes. These are really minimal sense of duties. This isn't like high freedom of speech, freedom of religion that we get in our Constitution. It's pretty low, but it's pretty steady because everyone has this, and everyone has an equal right then, not only to their life, but to their freedom and their property. This is a really different grounding for society than Hobbes. Okay, you might ask, I hope you ask, why do we have these rights? Where do they come from? We get that here. And this is where you want to circle this in your your text, wrestle with this, and figure out what this means. Because in my mind, all of Locke sort of hangs on this analysis. Okay. Continuing the quote, for men being all the workmanship of one omnipotent, infinitely wise maker. Who's that?
Yeah.
Scott, right. Locke here is like, this is curious. Like, he's not quoting Bible passages. Like, this is not Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. Like, this isn't a really elaborate allegorical, like, theological, like, no. But but he's got God here on page 1. We're all the servants of one sovereign master. It's not the Leviathan, it's God, sent into the world by his order and about his business. They are his property, whose workmanship they are, made to last during his, not one another's pleasure, and being furnished with like faculties, sharing all in one community of nature, that there cannot be any supposed subordination among us that may authorize us to destroy one another, as if we were made for one another's uses. Okay. Really different account of human person here. It's like, why are we all equal? Yeah.
Because we're all made by God.
We're all made by God, right? And why do we not naturally sort ourselves into hierarchy? Because I do, I look around the animal kingdom, and I look at the way deer behave, and I look at the way sheep behave, and I look at the way frogs behave, and they do this, they sort themselves into hierarchies. And Locke wants to say, we're not actually like that. And he's giving us a theological reason why, not a naturalistic kind of, where it's all sense perception, Hobbesian view, right? Why do we have to treat each other well? Why do I have to respect your rights? Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the words that he used were like, because we're carrying out the business of not our own, but of a maker.
Yes, yes. Yeah, he wants to say that you are actually God's property and everyone else is God's property. And that means that there's a sort of respect for other people's basic dignity that inherits. It's like, yeah, I can't do whatever I want to you because you're God's property, and vice versa. Right? This is a I think a not well understood aspect of Lockean liberalism. And I'm fairly comfortable with it because I'm a Christian. But this liberalism is also sort of like rooted in the Declaration of Independence, and it's rooted in the structure of the American experiment. And I'm not sure how well it works if you take the premise out. So as we kind of move forward with the secular enlightenment, we should come back to this and ask ourselves, okay, do we need a new grounding for rights if you step away from this idea that God gives everyone inherent dignity? There's so much more we could talk about, but for the sake of time, let's move to chapter 5. The first section is significant, but not earth-shattering, because most of what Locke is doing here, he has other Anglican theologians and Puritans that he's sort of riffing off of. It's chapter 5 where Locke blows up and founds modern liberal political thought. Chapter 5 is a section on property. I've heard some students call it the Capitalist Manifesto in answer to Marx's Communist Manifesto. That pushes things a little too far, but you could probably get most of the points on the exam if I had an idea that said Locke and you just responded Capitalist Manifesto. Like that would get you most of the way there. It's that really is the thing he does that no one had done before. So let's unpack that. Because that view of property as your essential freedom, that's a new thing. Like I don't see that in St. Paul. I don't see that in Aristotle. I certainly don't see that in the Catholic tradition, right? This is something that seems to be new. So, okay, chapter 34 begins with this expression. Let's read it. He starts with God. God gave the world to men in common. Let's just stop there. What does that mean?
So I'm trying to say like, there weren't parts of the world like designated for certain people. It was like just
Right.
all for the people.
Right. God created all of us. He creates all of us as being equal in dignity. And he created the world, and he created the world for all of us. So there's a state park. Oh, a state park. Let's not take the state park. All right, there's a wilderness area immediately to the south of campus. It's a beautiful bog, like right off Route 19. How many of you have been there yet? It's one of my favorite places. It's sort of out of walking distance. It's a long walk. It's beautiful. There's this little kind of hanging bog with moss that goes out onto the surface of the lake, and there are ducks and there are catfishes. Like it's a really wonderful place if you need to get off campus for an hour. Say that nobody owns it. Locke wants to say we all own that collectively, all of us. Which means that if we are hungry and want to catfish, we can just go fish for it and it belongs. It's like, yeah, anyone can take whatever they want from this pond. And that's the way that he would see like the oceans. The oceans don't belong to anyone. So anyone could go out 20 miles out, 100 miles out. I don't know how far out you have to go to be in international waters, but you go out in international waters, and international waters belong collectively to all mankind. Or you might say Antarctica, which is not a part of the southern country, right? So maybe Antarctica belongs to the Earth and common. Okay. Doesn't that sound like communism? But this is a strange move. Yeah.
It's difficult because he also said like we can accomplish things through our own labor.
Yeah.
It's all ours, but
Okay. Yeah, so this is stage one. He wants to say, like, everything belongs to everyone in common. But that's actually not God's plan. Luke's right. This is not God's plan for us. Because there's this second thing that Luke introduces, labor. Okay, what is labor? Let's just keep reading, right? God gave the world to men in common, but since he gave it to them for their benefit and the greatest conveniences of life they were able to draw from it, it cannot be supposed that he meant it always to remain common and uncultivated. God doesn't want Moss Lake to be Moss Lake. He doesn't want it as a wilderness. There's something unnatural about the natural wilderness. This is Locke's sort of argument. Like nature exists because God wanted us to do something with it. He gave it, and this is really interesting. Who does he give the earth to? He gave it to the use of the industrious and the rational. And that combination is really important in Lockean liberalism, the industrious and the rational inherit theory. So someone who wants to build a water mill on a stream to create enough power to grind, 1,000 barrels of wheat has a superior claim to the river to someone who just wants to sit back and put your feet in the water, float down the lazy river, maybe occasionally catch a catfish. Like Locke wants to say, no, God wants the stream to be developed. He wants it to benefit mankind. This is where Luke's point comes in. The next line is, and labor was to be his title to it. So how do you take the common property of the earth and make it into this thing we call private property? And the answer is labor. What do we mean by labor? Why does labor give you the right to own something? Yeah.
Because he's talking about like making it into something more than it already is.
Yeah. You have you've got the Genesee River out there. It's the wilderness, let's say, and it certainly was a wilderness in 1688, 1689. You have a village of 3,000 Seneca living alongside it, down by the Letchworth Falls. And Locke wants to say, yeah, I mean, they're enjoying it, but they're sort of enjoying the commonness of the river, and they don't actually really use the river. So if you want to come and build a dam on the river and use it to kind of benefit and feed a much larger amount of people, Locke would say, you've got greater title to it. And this is a justification that was used when Europeans showed up in New York and wanted to, depending on your regime, you might buy the land, you might not. The Dutch did a pretty good job of buying the land. The Puritans did a pretty good job of making sure that there was legal title. But yeah, not everyone did. Locke wrote the Constitution for North Carolina, I think. And in North Carolina, he wasn't as fussy about who owned the land, because in his mind, well, this is common land. We'll improve it. And if I put a fence around it, and chop down the trees and start digging the land, that makes it mine by right. Why? Because you actually, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, it's through work.
Yeah,
Like, I think labor also implies like.
yeah.
Endure pain
Mhm.
to achieve the goal.
Yeah, he wants to say that this is kind of this is a very Protestant work ethic idea, that labor actually has inherent dignity to it. Because God has given you your body. And if you use your body to improve something, then the thing improved is yours just as much as your body is. Liberalism gets really obsessed with the body and personal rights and personal freedom, right? Well, this right to work is an expression of that. And today we've got kind of two liberal parties in America, one of which is really obsessed with the right to choose what one wants to do with one's reproductive body, and the other party is really obsessed with the right to work and the right to choose what one wants to do with one's labor. But both of these parties are in some way really kind of Lockean parties. They just have really different angles on which right is more important, right? But like that's the sense in which Americans are really like. Okay. So you get this, why does he say this is a good thing? We could argue about whether or not the argument works, and we probably should, but why is private property better than common property? Yeah.
You can say that there's like this sense of progression that takes place when
Yes.
things are transferred from the common to the private.
Okay.
Because like what he said was, if God intended to make certain, like some land
Yeah.
that's meant for all,
Right.
more important for the industrious and the
Yes.
developers, then that
Okay.
means that God wants progress with the land.
Yeah, I think that's hard coded into this liberalism that developed land is better than undeveloped land.
And also, when people have their own private area,
Yes.
they're more likely to take better care of it than if
Yes.
it was a public area.
Yes, right. There's this sense that like, yeah, the human nature incentivizes that you're gonna work a lot harder, that private land is gonna be more efficiently farmed than public land. And yeah, Locke is arguing that. And it's easy to miss this, but he essentially says that you need 100 acres in America to support a family. And when you fence it, you can basically support an English family with 10 acres of farm. And what he wants to say is, isn't this better? Because then you can take 90 acres and devote it to some other purpose, right? That this is a more, and that there's something about this liberal, we value efficiency. When we get to Rousseau, Rousseau's going to completely flip this on its head, and he's going to treat nature much more romantically. Just say undeveloped nature is morally far superior to developed. So some of you that are bothered by Locke will get really excited when we get to Rousseau. He explicitly draws out the comparison in section 41. He says, there cannot be a clearer demonstration of anything than the several nations of the Americas are of this, which are rich in land and poor in all the comforts of life, whom nature has furnished as liberally as any other people with the materials of plenty. They have a fruitful soil, they can produce in abundance what might serve for food and raiment and delight, food, clothes, and delight. Yet for the one of improving it by labor, have not 1/100th part of the conveniences we enjoy. And this is a really famous line, I put it on exams sometimes. And a king of a large and fruitful territory there in America feeds, lodges, and is clad worse than a day laborer in England. Think about that. He's making a moral claim here that a king in America, an Iroquois chieftain, is clad, lodged, and feeds worse than an English peasant. Better to be an English peasant than an Iroquois chief. Why? this is to say nothing of an Iroquois king versus an English king, right? But a peasant on private property is much better than a chieftain of a giant. Yeah. What? Yeah.
It's like what you said previously, where like the land's not being used
Right.
efficiently.
Right.
And,
Right.
and so like, if the king is maintaining all of this and he's like, all right, do all that you can
Okay.
with the land, and the people aren't gonna either, they're not gonna take it as seriously,
Okay.
or they're just gonna be more flippant with the way
Okay.
that they work. Whereas with the private property, even though that they're peasants and they're probably
Okay.
worked to death and they're not treated as well,
Right.
they are
Right.
getting the fruits of their labor and they're
Right.
doing it efficiently because that's what the
Okay.
private king is telling them to do.
Okay. Yeah, they have more, right? Is that true? If we wanted to study that empirically as social scientists, is that true? Hear me out, hear my whole argument, but I think that part of the argument is empirically true. That you are actually, you have a higher calorie diet and your housing is better and your clothes are better. As a person living at the edge of poverty in England compared to someone living at quite high status in Europe. Okay, let me ask a question that Locke doesn't ask. Why doesn't an Iroquois chief want to be an English peasant? Locke doesn't ask this question, right? But like when Europeans encounter natives in this age of Locke, they expect that they will want to become Western as fast as humanly possible. They see this technological differential. And yet, you ask somebody like, it's the wrong century, but it's mine. I'm a 19th century scholar, so I'm a 19th century. You ask somebody like Sitting Bull, why Sitting Bull wants to live on the Great Plains and hunt instead of living in New York City with better food and clothes. Why does Sitting Bull want to live on the Great Plains? Yeah.
They're content with where they are.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, is it also the idea like of having property, like if you have property, all these other obligations, kind of hit you like,
Okay.
like it brings out human nature and like, I don't know.
Yeah. So there's a psychological aspect of what happens when we all get property. That maybe it would be better off not to bother with that. That's true.
It's hard to compare the two cultures because
Yes.
Iroquois or like just Native American people in general tend to be more like collectivistic, so they like
Sure.
really like put together everything for the common tribe.
Yes.
But
Yes.
European beliefs are more egocentric and
Yes.
very focused on.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is really good. And part of what we're trying to study in this course is this transformation from a traditional people. I think you could have gone to an English village in 1200 and they would have behaved more like Sitting Bull, like, because they are more communitarian and they are less oriented around individual possessions. So part of what we're studying as a course is this move toward private property and individualism. And Locke is now celebrating it as like, yes, this is true. Go ahead.
They're also based on a different religious background. So if we
Okay.
believe that property should be developed because of God, and if
Right.
we believe in God, then why should property be developed?
Yeah, I mean, they believe that nature, I mean, it's curious. This is really good. Native Americans also believe something similar to the God gave us the earth in common, right? I mean, that's a part of their mentality. I think, and this is something that I've not read in a lot of scholarship, and I probably won't ever write an article on this, but this is something that I think Locke misses, right? In order to prove that modern England is better than traditional America, he has to define it in equation terms that can be scientifically verifiable. And so if you reduce it to quantifiable things like housing and food and clothing, you can actually scientifically prove that, yes, in these terms, X is better than Y. But like, what, if you were to actually ask Sitting Bull, why do you want to live on the Great Plains? The answer that he would have given you is, well, we are free, right? It's very similar to the kind of answer you would have gotten from the king of Sparta, like in the 400s, like when the Persians came, like, why don't you want to live in our glorious empire? The Spartans would have said, well, because this is Sparta and we are free. And you're going to take our freedom from us. Like, it's that there's this sort of ineffable quality of like courage and freeness. Those aren't real words, but you know what I mean? That Locke doesn't seem to have a category of soul that measures that thing. And this is, I draw your attention to it because this is a problem that later Rousseau is going to try and solve. Rousseau wants to say, yes, but you've lost something. So Rousseau then is going to overcorrect and he's going to romanticize this idea, the noble savage is perfect. And like Rousseau goes too far in the other direction. But there's something about this mood that I find troubling. Okay, that takes us to this moment where we're kind of right at the cusp of the state of nature. Questions? We're moving way too slowly, but I'm drinking Mountain Dew and I'm having a lot of fun, so this is okay. All right, let's get into civil society, and then I suspect we'll be doing this again on Wednesday. That's fine. So chapter 7, Locke returns to God. Okay. God has made it a part of our nature that even though we are selfish and want to acquire property, that acquisitive nature, that might be the missing thing that Hobbes doesn't have. Like we aren't honor-seeking animals. We're kind of greedy, acquisitive. We want more, we want to acquire more property. God also made us that we didn't really want to be alone. I don't think Locke thinks that God made us all extroverts because we don't want a large society, but we want a small group of people around us. We want family and friends. So he says, God having made man such a creature that in his own judgment, it was not good for him to be alone, which is a direct riff on the Bible, right? That's Genesis 1 and 2, but notice that he doesn't give you verses here. Like, he's working off of a biblical account, but he doesn't quote the Bible like Bunyan does. Why is that? That's really interesting. Wrestle with that. I mean, that's like, this is strange because it's so obviously soaked in this kind of Christian approach, and yet he doesn't want to use the Bible as an authority. Okay. He put him under strong obligations of necessity, convenience, and inclination. So there's that psychological dimension. Why do we want family? Well, it's not that God commands it, and therefore, because God commands it, I'm going to do it. Why did I get married? This is a philosophical question, not an existential question. Please, this could filter back to my wife in really bad ways. Like, right? So let's zone of philosophy. Why did I get married? It's because the Bible commanded it? No, let's be honest. No, it's because I really liked her, right? And there's that sort of, like, we are made a certain way psychologically. And that kind of God creates us this way. He hardwires certain kind of things into our nature. And man's desire for woman and woman's desire for man are part of that naturedness that God creates that makes us pursue these things. So in that sense, not only is the individual management of property natural, but family is also natural. But notice that it comes after property. Property comes first for him, which is key in terms of the way that these rights kind of play out. The first society was between man and wife, which gave beginning to that between then parents and children, which in time to that between master and servant came to be added. Eventually, you get to a place where in our slow gradual development, you have lots of little families living together, but you don't get this nasty war of all against all, right? We're not all actually trying to kill each other. We're all sort of living in our own families together, maybe on these little farms in upstate New York. Why do we need anything more than that? There's a problem here. And it's not that we're all trying to kill each other because we want to be the glory. It's like, no. But what's the problem? There is a problem in human nature that leads us further than this, but Do you know what it is? The problem is a problem of law. Property requires law. It requires boundaries. It requires contracts. It requires things to set the terms of arrangement. And I can sort of take care of myself, and my selfishness will lead to the development of my property. But if my property is up against Irene's property here, and there's a line somewhere in between us, and we're trying to decide where it is, I can't be a fit judge of my own cause, and neither can she. And so we need people in the community to intervene to manage that dispute for us. We need the community to judge. And so that leads us into, he's going to say, civil society. But civil society isn't the same thing as the state. Civil society is just, well, now we're a group of people and we're living here in Houghton together. We all sort of have loose rules, but there are no rules that say we have to be back in our dorms, and there are no rules for chapel, and there's no president, so we still don't have a society. But what we do have is we have a group of people who are living together, and we have freedom and we have rights, and they don't come to us from the state, right? So this is a basis for what we might call a libertarian theory of politics. Okay, this is nice. We are at section 88. So pick up here, see if you can read from there through the end for Wednesday. And start on that Newton, I dare you. See what you can make of it. And we'll see if we can start to get into that on Wednesday too.